Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Waldron. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Friday, November 15th, 2019. Another show underway here now. Daily Co's Radio is live now. I can even read you the tweet that says it's live all the way from Portland, Maine. Kagro X, that's me, David Waldman, is just going to wing it today, and that's true because many things are happening. Many things. So we'll see what happens. I can already feel the voice coming on. Maybe a guy will walk up to him with tears in his eyes. Who knows? He could, you know what? I long for the days of the 7-foot-tall doctor at this point. Things were simpler then. Oh my God, I can't believe we're even saying that. Yes, bring back Michelle Buggy Eyes, what's her name? Bachman, that's it. I knew it was a B of some sort. I think we got it there. Okay. Time to roll today. Impeachment hearings back underway again today. I don't think they've started yet, although I think they have something like 8 witnesses lined up. So maybe they've started. I clicked just to see whether I could find the time simply and easily, but of course not. The first link available was C-SPAN 2 that said watch live, so I clicked. Maybe they started at 8 o'clock in the morning and just needed to get started early to get through so many people. I don't think so. That would be awfully early for them to start, but they do want to get an early start, I'm sure, on Friday and go home for the weekend, although committee members may be huddling here in D.C. for the weekend. Who knows? We'll see how things go. We'll see what happens. Over at the Roger Stone trial, the jury is in deliberations today. Best point I've seen made so far was the observation, I think Empty Wheel making the observation yesterday when they went to deliberations, that it was unlikely that they were going to come back quickly, not because the evidence wasn't overwhelming enough to reach the conclusion that Stone ought to be convicted, but because it was only Thursday. And the jurors know full well that just a little bit of deliberation will get them through the day and then back into the courthouse tomorrow. Not the most pleasant place to be, but why not take Friday off from work as well and enjoy lunch in the courthouse and get your stipend? You make more money going to work, of course, than taking off, but most places will give you paid leave for work. You get a small stipend. You get, she said, a free lunch. I don't know how that works in D.C. courts. Back in New Jersey, as I recall, you were paying for your own lunch in the cafeteria there, but I don't know. Maybe they gave you a stipend for that too. I don't remember. Anyway, they'll want to take Friday off from work. However, if they do decide they have enough to convict Roger Stone, they might very well want to get that done on the early part of the day and then be dismissed with the thanks of the court and sent on their way early for what would essentially be a long weekend for them, giving Roger Stone the opportunity to approach the microphones and rage about the American justice system, insist that he'll be appealing his conviction, et cetera, et cetera. I don't know if he's a tearful guy. He doesn't strike me as that kind of person. He would lash out instead. I'm sure he'll be dressed nattily to do it. I would suggest stripes for today would be appropriate. I don't know what he's got in the wardrobe. And I think people would like those goofy glasses and maybe a long cigarette holder, like penguin style. I know he's got a top hat somewhere, or at least he rented it for one of the inaugural parties, I believe. So good day to head to the wardrobe and look for something ridiculous for which we're all actually laughing at you. Not with you, Roger Stone. Okay. So we're up to speed on that. Still don't know exactly when the hearings begin, but I'm guessing that they likewise will start right in the middle of the show like last time. Perhaps 10, perhaps 9 is a good time to get these things started. None of the reporters thought that was important enough so far as I can tell to tell you when they will begin. But Ambassador or former Ambassador Jovanovic, I believe, leads things off today. I did see in the news yesterday, among the many things that we have to catch up on, that AP is reporting that a second source has been found. A second source has come forward. A second source has been, I don't know, exhumed, dragged from the river. How do you get these people? Who overheard the conversation between EU Ambassador Gordon Sondland and quote-unquote President of the United States, Donald J. Trump, from the Kyiv restaurant, discussing how they were going to arrange the quid pro quo that the president wanted everyone to know wasn't one, but it actually was, because he doesn't know what that means, and he just thought if he mouthed the words, and I guess loudly, that no one would be any the wiser. Well, the president of the United States himself said it wasn't a quid pro quo. I heard him leaking out of the earpiece of the ambassador's unsecure cell phone in the middle of Kyiv's restaurant scene. So, well done there. I just can't really explain exactly how that has been allowed to happen, but we went over that yesterday. Here's the news from it. AP source says second U.S. official in Kyiv heard Trump call. I'm trying to figure out live and on the air how I want to deal with this newfound pronunciation for the city. There has to be something more to it than just Kyiv. There's got to be a little hitch in there somewhere. That would suggest to me that in Russian that would become. Oh, I bet it's not even pronounced in Russian. Kiev, it's probably Kyiv. I would guess in Ukrainian, not just Kyiv. Kyiv. There's a little hitch. There's two e sounds in there, and that I guess could easily find its way in a similar but not identical language into Kyiv or Kiev. And then into English as Kiev. Chicken Kiev. Do we have to say that now? Do we have to order chicken Kiev? Or Kyiv? Or Kyiv if it's in Hawaii or something like that? Just to borrow from another of the, 80s movies that defined my life. It was the 80s or 90s. I don't even remember the name of the one now. Nicolas Cage, Sarah Jessica Parker, right? She goes with James Caan to Hawaii from their honeymoon in Vegas. Is that it? Okay. We're right on top of the news here. I think you should impeach Trump just for being alive while that movie was made. That's not necessarily his fault, but it's attempted his fault, and so I think that should count. All right. The actual news from AP is that a second U.S. Embassy staffer in Kyiv overheard a cell phone call between President Donald Trump and his ambassador to the European Union discussing a need for Ukrainian officials to pursue, quote, investigations, the Associated Press has learned, and then told us. The July 26th call between Trump and Gordon Sondland was first described during testimony Wednesday, a million years ago, by William Taylor, the, sound effects please, acting U.S. ambassador to Ukraine. Taylor said one of his staffers overheard the call and probably couldn't even help it. Overheard the call while Sondland was in a Kyiv restaurant the day after Trump's July 25th phone call with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, with an IY in the AP style. Interesting. That triggered the House impeachment inquiry. The second diplomatic staffer was also at the same table. This was Surya Jayanti, a foreign service officer based in Kyiv. A person briefed on what Jayanti overheard. Oh boy, this is going to drive Jim Jordan up the wall. A person briefed on what Jayanti overheard. Spoke to AP on condition of anonymity. I'm going to stop saying why people are granted anonymity, although it is very interesting analysis for the journalism critics to look at. But I mean, why do you think they were granted anonymity? It's important to say, I suppose, as part of the deal, but as far as information for the rest of us, they spoke on condition of anonymity to discuss a sensitive matter currently under investigation. Isn't really all requests for anonymity is I don't want to get in trouble with anybody? Yeah. All right. The accounts of the two embassy staffers could tie Trump closer to alleged efforts to hold up military aid to Ukraine. They are alleged. They happened. Anyway, to hold up military aid to Ukraine in exchange for investigations into political rival Joe Biden, Hunter Biden, business dealings, yada yada. In defending Trump on Wednesday, Republicans repeatedly highlighted that Taylor never directly heard the president or anyone to demand that the Ukrainians open the probe. It's just that he heard from, I guess, two people who heard the president say it over Sondland's phone. I want you to look into these things. There's investigations. We'll see what happens. I guess. Make a telephone sound effect for me. Filter my voice. All right. I wonder how clearly he comes across over that. Anyway, Trump on Wednesday said he did not recall the July 26th call with Sondland. No, not at all. Not even a little bit, Trump said. And of course, here's where call logs come into it. Trump, I'm sure, thinks that he's a genius for taking his calls, as they said in yesterday's article, off the books. But all that leaves us with is we can't prove that the call took place until we subpoena the phone records, the cell phone records from Gordon Sondland and or Trump, which I assume is coming next. But if you are strict about logging your calls and give no one reason to believe that you are routinely or even occasionally taking off-the-books calls in order to foil the logging system, then you should be able to point to the logs and say, there's no call between me and Sondland, and no call between Sondland and me, and I don't know who initiated the call. I've seen reporting that makes it sound like it could have gone either way, although honestly, I don't know. I don't know which one is more doubtful. Which one do you think is more doubtful? That Sondland can pick up a cell phone from a restaurant in Kyiv and call the president and get through? It's not clear whether he gets through directly. Does he call the direct line? Does he call the White House and say, it's Ambassador Gordon Sondland for the President of the United States? I would think in the movies it sounds like a call that they put through, right? But, with Trump continually insisting also at the same time, I don't know him. I have no idea who he is. I met him maybe once. He gave me $1 million, et cetera, et cetera. So I don't know who to believe. There's too many lies to be able to offer up an educated guess even about how it happened. But you can't even point to the logs and say it didn't happen because you're a habitual liar and everyone knows it. So to point to the logs and say it didn't happen when we all know you take calls off the books and you're a liar is just not convincing. We're just stuck with the word of a inveterate liar saying he didn't have the call, which we all take to mean that you actually did have the call. Well, that's the downside of getting rid of that bureaucratic red tape that, as it turns out, is designed to actually protect you, but you think of as an impediment to doing business in a way that won't get you convicted. And so therefore you've decided to forego these protections. You wouldn't I'm sure it's not the sort of thing he would have understood, even if it had been presented to him that way. All right. So he says he doesn't remember the call. The White House didn't respond to questions Thursday about the second witness to the call with Sondland. The staffer Taylor testified about is David Holmes, the political counselor at the embassy in Kyiv, according to an official familiar with the matter. Guess what? Who spoke on condition of anonymity. And you know what? They don't even tell you why they spoke on the condition of anonymity. So I guess that's good. Holmes is scheduled to testify Friday before House investigators in a closed session. That would be today. Taylor was one of the first witnesses, and again, note the sanctimonious use of the word before. I do find that kind of interesting. They just won't shake that. Anyway, Holmes is scheduled to testify before House investigators. Closed session. Oh, so we won't see that one. Interesting. And I think some of the sessions, though, are scheduled to be open for today. That's why C-SPAN is covering them. Taylor was one of the first witnesses called Wednesday during impeachment inquiry's initial open hearing. He testified that his staffer could hear Trump on the phone asking Sondland about, quote, the investigations. Later that day, a Twitter account that appears to belong to Ukraine's then defense minister, Alexander Daniluk. I think I heard the pronunciation on Wednesday. and I think I was going with Daniluk, but I think it's just Daniluk, posted a photo of himself at dinner with Sondland. Dinner? I thought it was lunch. Maybe I have that wrong. Dinner with Sondland, Taylor, and Ambassador Kurt Volker, who was then Trump's special envoy to Ukraine for peace negotiations. So, okay, later that day. So, all right, interesting. I think. What does that tell us? That tells us where Sondland ate his meals that day? I don't... Do I have that right? Did we say in this article that it happened during lunch or no? It just says in a restaurant, right? Yeah, okay. Overheard the call while Sondland was in a Kiev restaurant that day after Trump's phone call. So it doesn't say lunch necessarily. So maybe that's meant to imply that that was the meal during which it happened, which would mean that on July 26th, if two staffers at the table overheard the president talking about the investigations, then it certainly would have been possible for, I guess this is what we're supposed to infer from this, that Alexander Daniluk would likewise have been able to hear the conversation, though whether only a native English speaker would be able to make out exactly what was happening in the muffled tones, or whether they weren't muffled at all, I don't know. But for all the time that was spent during Wednesday's hearing, the Republicans trying to debunk the idea that that there could be a quid pro quo, i.e., bribery and evidence, or I guess elements of the crime of bribery and extortion, the quid pro quo, not necessary to complete, of course, in order to be convicted of the crime. But at any rate, they were trying to prove that couldn't have happened because the Ukrainians had no idea that the aid was being withheld and what they were being asked to do in exchange for the aid. But it may very well be the case that on July 26th, Alexander Daniluk was able to figure it out because he heard the president blurt it out on an unsecure phone line with Gordon Sondland at dinner at a restaurant in Kyiv. Read that fast, Jim Jordan. See how you do. Since 2014, the Ukrainian government has been battling Russian-backed separatists in the country's eastern region. That's Donbass, right? And the continuation of U.S. military aid is crucial to its defense. Whether Trump directed nearly $400 million in aid to be withheld to force the Ukrainians to open investigations into Democrats is a key question in the impeachment inquiry. Current and former U.S. officials say Sondland's use of a cell phone in a public place in Ukraine to speak with anyone in the U.S. government back home about sensitive matters, let alone the president, let alone about a crime, I would add, would be a significant breach of communications security. And dumb as well. Jayanti is an attorney who must have been shocked to death, who joined the State Department in 2012 and was previously posted at the U.S. Embassy in Iraq. She has been stationed since September 2018 at the embassy in Kyiv, where she helps coordinate U.S. business interests with the former Soviet Republic's energy industry. Oh my goodness, she knows everything. Okay, Jayanti was in Washington last month and scheduled for a closed-door interview with impeachment investigators. How do you like that? So she could have told them, oh yeah, I heard the president say that. She would have been the first one for us to hear about. But the deposition was canceled because of the funeral of former House Oversight Chair Elijah Cummings and has not yet been rescheduled. How interesting is that? A little bit is the answer to my own question. Holmes, a career diplomat, joined the Foreign Service in 2002 and has served in Afghanistan, Colombia, India, Kosovo, and Russia, as well as on the White House National Security Council staff. Interesting. He won an award for constructive dissent from the American Foreign Service Association in 2014. This is interesting, too, and I'll wait till you hear the rest of the sentence, but just stopping for a second to say there's an award for constructive dissent, which, of course, makes you think that's a very responsible Foreign Service officer, like really a watchdog, right? Dissent within the ranks and constructive dissent at that, staying within the system, doing it the right way, letting your complaints go up the chain of command as is proper. Republicans, of course, would ordinarily paint that as, oh, he got an award for being a complainer and a backstabber. So what good is that? Only the Democrats would give you awards for that. But then they're right. The rest of the sentence says, that the award was given in 2014 for complaining about problems. You shouldn't get awards for that. Complaining about problems that an alternate diplomatic channel, and this is 2014, an alternate diplomatic channel had caused in South Asia, in South Asia, yeah, and recommending, problems, I see, I'm sorry, for complaining about problems that an alternative diplomatic channel had caused in South Asia. That would be during the Obama administration. And recommending organizational changes to the State Department's bureaucratic structure for the region, I guess to prevent those problems from being caused by things as annoying as alternative diplomatic channels. I have no guess, because we all have been, I guess, it never rose to the level of finding its way to general interest newspaper reporting, I guess, that in 2014 or prior years, that there had been some troublesome alternative diplomatic channel established within the Obama administration with respect to events in South Asia. And I don't know what that might be about. I must have missed that story. I'll bet there are traces of it out there in the papers, though, and we can sleuth it out at some point. But what was that all about? And interestingly here, self-correcting here, the State Department gave an award to the guy who, exposed it, complained about it. I guess he didn't expose it. He went through channels, and they created a backup system to make sure that it wouldn't create those problems if such alternate diplomatic channels existed. But that'll be interesting fodder, I think, for the Republicans. If they bother to read this deep into any news article, they can sit there and complain that, hey, when President Obama established alternate diplomatic channels, it wasn't such a big deal. Although then I guess your counter could be, it was a big deal. Somebody who found out about it and complained about it and fixed it got an award for it. It's that serious. You, on the other hand, just kept doing it. No, and you're not giving anybody awards for exposing it. You're firing them, hounding them, trying to expose them to danger at the hands of your supporters by publicly revealing their names and addresses and whereabouts. So I guess it could be turned around pretty quickly. I wonder whether, I have my doubts about whether the Republicans will read this far into an article. But if they do, I really have no doubt that they won't be able to figure out how this could be turned around on them. But I guess I would put even odds on the ability of Democrats to realize that it could be turned around on them, rather than running away and saying, oh gosh, they both sides us to death and now we have to give up. All right. We'll see whether that happens. So where do we leave off? Won the award for constructive dissent. Here's why. He recommended organizational changes. I guess they made them. Or maybe just, here's an award for such good ideas, and we'll now throw out your ideas now that we're done with it. Here's your award, though. U.S. diplomats and other government employees are instructed not to use cell phones for sensitive official matters while traveling anywhere abroad, and notably in countries known to be targeted for surveillance by intelligence agencies such as Russia, China, and Israel. Interesting combination. Ukraine has long been among the countries of concern, particularly since a 2014 incident, same year, they had a lot of problems that year, in which the U.S. accused Russian intelligence of eavesdropping on and then leaking a recording of the conversation between two senior U.S. officials in Kyiv that led to great embarrassment and strains between the U.S. and the European allies. You heard that story regarding Victoria Nuland and U.S. Ambassador to Ukraine Jeff Pyatt, F the EU. They use a lot fewer dashes in the AP style. Was it the Washington Post we were reading yesterday that went with the F and 3 dashes? AP, for your information, goes with F-CK. So, just so you know, they'll do a lot more. If we assume that 1 dash equals 1 letter, we know pretty much what this is about. If the dash is just sort of like an ellipses, I guess there exists the possibility that she said fire truck the EU, but I think that would be a lot less controversial. Anyway, I think the rest of the story appears to be about how dumb it was to have that phone call. So, assuming that we all know and agree that it is dumb, we can perhaps skip down here a little bit. In a closed-door hearing last month, former White House Russia advisor Fiona Hill said she was concerned that Sondland posed a counterintelligence risk, not just because he's dumb with sensitive information, I guess, but according to a transcript released by the House, Fiona Hill did say that she thought that about Sondland. Hill cited a Sondland habit of giving out personal cell phone numbers. Hers, Fiona Hill's, wow, that's really nervy, and National Security Advisor John Bolton's, as well as his own, and his failure to get appropriately briefed ahead of meetings. It's very Trump-like in his behavior. Okay, so that brings us almost to the break here. Is there anything else in this article that we need to distill out? Hill said officials from Europe would literally appear at the gates of the White House and call her personal phone, which was kept in a lockbox. So it was very unlikely to even work to anyone's benefit to give out Fiona Hill's number or John Bolton's, right? At the critical moments when they are busy advising the president, their phones are locked up for security reasons. Well, that's also a very interesting tidbit. I thought that we get some good sense of what normal procedure is like inside the White House and how abnormal the Trump White House's procedure has been instead. Okay, we'll catch up on those stories, look ahead to the weekend, see if we can figure out who's going to have their time in the barrel over the weekend besides Roger Stone. We'll be right back. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, and I've learned that I either need to update these announcements more often or stop saying that the announcements are brand new. What's not new is that this message, too, is a call for your support in keeping the Kagro in the Morning show on the air. My thanks go out to all of you who do support the show through your donations. The stats say that Kagro in the Morning fans download our program about 2,000 times each weekday, but our donors make up only about 8% of our daily listeners. Patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it simple to make easy, secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. If we're helping keep you sane during the Trump era, consider what that's worth. $1 a day? 50 cents? One thin dime? We do about 20 shows a month, so pick a number, do the math, and head to Patreon.com/KagroX to let us know. Thanks again, everyone, for all your support. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. And as it turns out, our check-in with the hearings is that they are, in fact, underway. I can see that the live feed from C-SPAN has been churning, and there's some transcript, a very poor transcript, I would say, automatic voice recognition transcript. It looks like it's got a few places that they'll want to clear things up, but I guess it's Ambassador Jovanovic on the stage now. And Kate Sherrill tells us, by the way, by way of update, let's see, Devin Nunes just accused Dems of believing that Trump is a Russian agent. That's not true at all. Well, I don't know. I'm not certain that that's not true universally. Trump doesn't have the capabilities, she says, needed to be an agent. He's an asset, a useful idiot. Yes, that's entirely possible. Okay, so just to clear things up, it's not that he didn't want to be an agent, it's that he's too dumb to be an agent, and that the Russians would likely view him as an asset but never an agent. That's probably true. And furthermore, Jim Jordan, Conway, and Stefanik keep trying to interrupt Adam Schiff while he's trying to get things started. I see, what I had said was that with the terrible transcript, I see a lot of objections and points of order being offered, and I don't know, maybe the transcript isn't wrong, but I thought I saw, they don't identify the speakers in this automated transcript. I imagine Schiff saying at some point, the gentle lady, I guess I don't know who was making objections. The gentlelady is not organized. I think it was maybe the gentlelady is not recognized for that purpose. It was, just gaveling down her point of order. But she may also just be a disorganized person. I don't really know who they're talking about or why that would be relevant, but it sounded funny anyway. All right, back to what's in pocket to pick up on a couple other fun Friday stories. We can move a little bit away from the hearings. How about we move in reverse order here? By proximity to what we've just been talking about. We'll open up our circle and move a little further out. How about a little more on Lev Parnas? It's always fun to catch up on what Lev is up to. Who have we here? Yes. It is the Daily Beast. Lachlan Markay and Betsy Swan have this piece. 5 cell phones, Trump straws, a lot of cash. What this Giuliani crony, Lev Parnas, was carrying when the FBI arrested him. That is pretty amazing. When they say carrying, did they seize him in a car? Was he really literally carrying 5 cell phones? I think the funniest part of all this, of course, is the Trump straws that he had bought, the plastic straws, because, I don't know, we're supposed to be like, we'll all get triggered because they're using plastic straws and something environmental. But you know how they did this thing. When Rudy Giuliani crony Lev Parnas was arrested last month. Oh, yes, that's right. I forgot about what we're talking about. He'd be in the airport, so he really would be carrying all these things. The TSA should have arrested him. 5 cell phones. You're under arrest just for that. When Rudy Giuliani crony Lev Parnas was arrested last month, federal agents combed through his personal effects and found the business card of a Ukrainian prosecutor who, months earlier, met with Giuliani to discuss the conspiracy theories at the heart of the Trump impeachment inquiry. Anti-corruption prosecutor Nazar Kolodnitsky's card. Nazar Kolodnitsky. My best guess. Kolodnitsky. Yeah, I mean, that's how we'd probably do, although who knows, it's maybe Kolodnitsky. Anyway, Kolodnitsky's card was among the 66 personal items that the FBI reported seizing from Parnas after his arrest at Washington's Dulles International Airport last month. Oh, look at this. I've landed on a members-only story for the Daily Beast, so I might not be able to get all the way through this. But anti-corruption prosecutor's card was in there. The other items, according to an itemized list of the effects obtained by PayDirt, are available here. It's not clear when or how Parnas obtained that card, but his arrest came months after Giuliani met Kolodnitsky in Paris for a discussion that touched on, believe it or not, the Bidens, and supposed Ukrainian interference in the 2016 presidential election. Here's what I can make out before the type fades out, and we'll see how good they are at this sort of security for their stories by checking the version in pocket here. But Kolodnitsky was caught on tape earlier this year, and there's a link and everything, apparently suborning false testimony and tipping off prosecution targets to impending raids. So that makes him a very reliable witness. And not necessarily about this, but, or that is, he wasn't necessarily suborning false testimony and tipping off prosecution targets with regard to any investigation of the Bidens, just in his general line of work. He claims the recordings were taken out of context. Okay, but Marie Ivanovich, who's testifying right now, until this year, the U.S. ambassador to Ukraine, called for Kolodnitsky's removal. So it's something of a habit among the U.S. diplomatic community to call for the removal of prosecutors in Ukraine, I guess, when they're corrupt. Instead, Yovanovitch was recalled after a sustained lobbying campaign by Giuliani, Parnas, and his political and business associate, Igor Fruman. So just to clear that up, the U.S. diplomatic community said catching Kolodnitsky on tape suborning false testimony and tipping off prosecution targets to impending raids means he's corrupt and should be removed. Whereas to Giuliani, Parnas, and Fruman, and I guess Donald Trump and others, catching Kolodnitsky on tape suborning false testimony and tipping off prosecution targets to impending raids means that the person who caught him, or the person who wants to disseminate the information that he's been caught anyway should be removed. That's the person who's got to go, because Kolodnitsky is a guy we can work with. And so that's why I took his business card, for instance, might be the conclusion you reach based on that. All right. Well, the Daily Beast story cuts off there because of it being a members-only story, but I did see a lot of discussion around the internet about, laughing about the fact that Parnas had been caught with the straws on him. So my guess is that there's other reporting available about it, and I wouldn't be surprised if we could find another source for that information. Do we have that? Is there anything else? Who else has got? My Google search for Lev Parnas and straws brings up the Daily Beast story, but then let's see. There's more about Parnas in the news these days. One about Governor DeSantis meeting with Lev Parnas at some point, and then one in the New York Post that looks somewhat intriguing too. Man owed money by Giuliani pal Lev Parnas for failed movie, wants bail bond garnished. Interesting. You remember that story? That would have been the Pues family. Michael Pues, I guess, saying, if he's going to put up $1 million cash bond, I'd like to garnish that bond and recover $500,000 that they owe us after defrauding us in the movie deal. But I don't know whether they're going to get that or not. I don't know whether the government does want to give up it doesn't make any difference to Parnas. He's lost that money anyway. Or maybe he thinks he's getting it back. But I suppose if they hand half of it away and say, now your bond is only worth $500,000 to you, maybe he's more of a flight risk. I don't know. I'm sure he's a pretty good flight risk as it stands. I don't know. Maybe someone else has more experience in how likely courts are to give that money away. Maybe after he's reported for his trial and is in custody again, they might be willing to give that away. I don't know whether it has any more or less. Think about that economically. Does it have any more or less power to keep him in check as a flight risk if there's the possibility that he'll only get half of it back even if he does show up? I don't know. That's an interesting question. But it doesn't answer the question about what else he had besides 5 cell phones and straws with him. But I don't know if we need to know that much more. But it is interesting that on his way to Vienna, I guess it is interesting that he brought the straws, although maybe it's just one of several stupid items that are in his briefcase that he tossed in there one time and just left there for reasons unknown. Or whether he thought that was an essential item to bring with him to Vienna. I have really got no idea. Maybe he was planning on taking a thumbs-up picture with Joe Geneva and Victoria Tensing in Vienna drinking, I don't know, what would you go to Vienna to drink through a straw? Guess it could be anything. All right, let me see. One more try at this. Lev Parnas, should we say Trump straws? I don't know. I'm not sure how to find out more information. Maybe it's exclusive to the Daily Beast after all. Yeah, all right. Well, okay. Oh, here's somebody who's written about it on the Democratic Underground blog and a couple other blogs. So maybe do you think they had access to the article and read the whole thing? No, probably. Oh, they're just posting the tweet. All right. So we may never know the further information about the straws and why he was carrying them and whether there was any explanation for him having 5 cell phones or not. But that's the sort of thing. Again, I would think the TSA would have some questions about that. Literally, just in terms of questions about, are any of these a bomb trigger? That I would think that they would get nervous about things like that. But they're seasoned professionals, and maybe they didn't know what they may never even have had a look in his bags. I don't know how far into the airport he was when he was finally arrested. Let's see. I want to check in on other information here. Sounds like there's a lot of analysis, on-the-spot analysis about what Jovanovic has to say. It'll be very difficult, though, to follow that. We'll have to sort of digest that over the weekend and discuss it on Monday. Moving then further out in the ring of disasters emanating from the Trump administration, let's visit our friends in Saudi-owned Arabia for just a moment. We brought this story to you last week that the Sauds were using contacts with either Saud, how will we refer to what the newspapers normally call Saudi citizens, if we're not really acknowledging Saudi Arabia as a regular sort of country. Well, I don't have language for this, but they were using Saudi Arabian citizens who worked for Twitter in particular to get a hold of information on dissidents and their online activities. And there's some further information on this. Saudi spies hacked my phone and tried to stop my activism. I won't stop fighting. A first-hand account by Omar Abdulaziz, who was one of the people targeted in this activity. He writes this in the Washington Post, and, it's daring for him to do so because the last guy who complained about Saudi Arabia in the Washington Post got chopped up into pieces. And he acknowledges this. Omar Abdulaziz is a Saudi activist. He lives in Montreal, we are told at the top of the piece. And then he begins in his own voice. In the fight against the online campaigns targeting Saudi citizens, I had a powerful ally and friend in Jamal Khashoggi, who recognized the power of Twitter to shape public opinion in Saudi Arabia and the rest of the Arab world. Jamal was, of course, murdered because he was willing to fight trolls and propaganda with truth and ideas. But we are still learning how far Saudi-ish or Saud-owned Arabia and Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman is willing to go to monitor and silence critics online. We have some idea now, though. Last week, the Justice Department announced it was charging 2 former Twitter employees with spying for Saud-owned Arabia by accessing the company's information on dissidents on the platform. I was one of the targets. It's all been part of a coordinated campaign of harassment. Saudi-owned Arabia, using spyware sold by the Israeli company NSO Group, hacked my phone to read my messages with Jamal, with whom I was working to identify and combat Saudi trolls on Twitter, which we called the electronic bees. Why not? It's at least as descriptive as trolls. We were working together to organize an army of volunteers to counter them. Okay. The Saudi government deployed every tactic to get me to drop the project. They arrested my relatives and friends to pressure me. They imprisoned my brothers and asked them to convince me to stop working on our volunteer campaign. Jamal was shocked they had learned about it and asked me to never discuss it publicly. You can see why. To understand why they cared so much about protecting their Twitter trolls, you have to understand the popularity and importance of Twitter for Saudis. Since we didn't have a lot of options for entertainment in Saudi Arabia, we coped with our environment by living in a different reality on our smartphones. Twitter soon became crucial to exercise the first element of individual liberty, freedom of expression. The platform's popularity exploded among Saudis virtually overnight. Be careful about what explodes among Saudis. We lived democratically on Twitter. People posted freely. You can see why that might be very exciting to them. Twitter even allowed people to engage with dissidents in exile, something that wouldn't have been possible before. What's the point of exile then, right? It also allowed the government to track public opinion. At first, the government was responsive. Royal decrees were announced on Twitter. Rumors circulated, but also got debunked. Officials faced pressure to be more transparent. That all changed with the rise of MBS, Mr. Modernity, right? Saudi Twitter gradually morphed into a propaganda platform, with the government deploying trolls and pressuring influencers to amplify its messages. More than 30 influencers told me that the Saudi government blackmailed them with material obtained by hacking their phones. 30. They were given 2 options: tweet propaganda or have your private content, including pictures, released on Twitter. McKinsey & Company, the consulting firm, prepared a report for MBS on how public opinion is shaped on Twitter. They identified me among the top 3 most influential users on Twitter. I'm now in exile. Another got arrested. And the third user vanished. His tweets were all deleted. In September 2017, more than 100 Twitter influencers were arrested. And on its face, outside of context, that is a very appealing prospect. There are 100 Twitter influencers I'd like to see arrested too. Although really Instagram is the place to go for me. And not for any political agenda, but just because I think what they're doing is dumb. But, we don't arrest people for things like that in this country. We think. Currently. I don't know. Anyway, that's interesting. September 2017, more than 100 Twitter influencers were arrested. The charges were never made public. In December of that year, Jamal tweeted, "Saudi government trolls have a devastating effect on the national public opinion." In unison, Saudi trolls ridicule free folks and resistance, Jamal added. He worried the propaganda was dividing the country, and he's right. Fake accounts and hired writers spread hatred among Saudis with tribal and racist attacks. And that's a dangerous place to do that with, but okay. It's not nice anywhere. But bad things happen when you spread tribal and racist hatred among people who have access to no other information. Really, it's anywhere. But, of course, we have a history of this problem in the Middle East on top of it all. But Twitter is still worth fighting for, he continues. It remains the only free platform for many Saudis. After Jamal's death, my team spent months trying to counter the troll narratives with trending hashtags. I don't know if that's the best weapon, but I guess it's all you got. It's sad to see that Twitter may be one of the factors behind Jamal's brutal murder. It's a heartbreaking development because we had so much hope on the platform. In 2013, Jamal posted, "Someday Twitter will win a Nobel Prize." But now we see it slipping into darkness. Will Twitter take measures to protect our public square? Right now, I'm worried, but I will continue to fight for free expression, at least online. Very interesting. Interesting new developments and new details about these things. And a lot of pressure for those at Twitter, I guess, being up for the Nobel Prize. I don't know if they ever anticipated that, but just add that to the pile of unintended consequences, I think, for social media platform operators and owners. I am pretty sure that at the outset, the founders of Facebook never realized exactly what they had in their hands. The ability to reshape the emerging democratic future as a dystopian dictatorship nightmare. That's a problem. But having realized it, they have opted to embrace it and profit from it. And that's troublesome. On the other hand, Twitter at the moment is looking to occupy the opposite public space in their decision to ban political advertising, but it doesn't go as far. We shouldn't lose sight of the fact, in the wake of that news, that Twitter response has been woefully inadequate with respect to policing trolls and bots and propaganda efforts, not to mention the private, non-governmental efforts of individuals and groups who, likewise, whether in coordination with governments or just in parallel with the radical elements that comprise those governments, have been harassing people, in particular women, I think, have been getting the worst of it for a long time, all over Twitter, sometimes with a governmental agenda, sometimes not. All right. Well, real interesting. And, boy, there certainly seems to be a lot going on with that Jovanovic trial. The rest of you are probably watching that, and I envy you the ability to do that. I don't think we could do both at the same time. But in case you're not watching, we'll get you up to speed on everything else. Everyone will be talking about Jovanovic for the rest of the day, I am sure. But you'll also know the other things that we have to bring to you to share. Let's see. There's this information that we didn't share yesterday from the Washington Post, update on the Trump tax records and the lawsuits growing out of them. The decision of the en banc seating of the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals says that Congress can seek 8 years of Trump's tax records, according to the court order in the case. I guess they upheld the lower court decision as well as the D.C. Appeals Court decision before the en banc rehearing. Congress, I'll explain all of that along the way here. Congress can seek 8 years. I thought it was 6, but now 8 years of President Trump's tax records, according to a federal appeals court order Wednesday that moves the separation of powers conflict one step closer to the Supreme Court. And yes, Trump has already announced his intention to take it there. We'll see what happens. We'll see whether that goes the way he's expecting or not. The U.S. Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia Circuit let stand an earlier ruling against the president that affirmed Congress's investigative authority on a day when the House was holding its first public impeachment inquiry hearing. That'd be Wednesday. Trump lawyer Jay Sekulow said in response to Wednesday's decision that the president's legal team, quote, will be seeking review at the Supreme Court. The D.C. Circuit was responding to Trump's request to have a full panel of judges rehear a 3-judge decision from October that rejected the president's request to block lawmakers from subpoenaing his longtime accounting firm. Aha, okay. So, just to clear things up, at this point, what they're telling you has happened here is Trump went to court to ask for, I don't know exactly how they styled it, but to ask for a court order blocking congressional, are we talking about congressional requests? The congressional requests for his, let's see. In this case, subpoenaing the accounts of Mazars, right? Mazars USA, the accounting firm, for his tax information. Maybe that's where the 8 years request comes from, as opposed to the statutory request under the law giving the chair of the Ways and Means Committee the right to examine, I thought it was up to 6 years of tax information just at a simple request. But okay, so what ended up happening was they went to federal court to block the subpoena to Mazars. The federal trial court, the district court in the District of Columbia, that's why it's a little bit confusing. But the district court is the lowest level trial courts. The trial courts in the federal system are called the district courts, and they're divided up by the same districts that U.S. attorneys represent, right? The SDNY, Southern District of New York, has a federal district court for the Southern District of New York where federal trials are held. If you are appealing the result in that trial, if you're up in New York, you would appeal to the Second Circuit Court of Appeals. If you're appealing from a federal district court ruling in Washington, D.C., you would appeal to the the Circuit Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia, for the District of Columbia, as it happens. And that'd be the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals. What happens there, both in the Second Circuit and the D.C. Circuit, is you then have an appeals court seated of 3 judges selected from among the many on the D.C. Circuit Court or the Second Circuit. And these 3 judges will hear the appeal from the federal district court. From there, most people assume that the appeal from there is to the Supreme Court, and very often it is. But there is an intermediate step available. You can request rehearing of the appeal case that the 3-judge panel heard. You can ask for the entire panel, the whole D.C. Circuit or the whole Second Circuit, to sit and either hear arguments or reconsider the appeal case. So they did that here. That's the stage we're at. So picking up with the newspaper report on that here. A majority of the court's 11 active judges voted against revisiting the case. 3 judges, Naomi Rao, Gregory Katsas, and Karen LaCraft Henderson, indicated that they would have granted the rehearing and published dissenting statements. Rao and Katsas, both former Trump administration officials, were nominated to the bench by the president. This case presents exceptionally important questions regarding the separation of powers, Katsas wrote. He warned of the, quote, threat to presidential autonomy and independence, and said it would be, quote, open season on the president's personal records, unquote, if Congress is allowed to compel the president to disclose personal records based on the possibility that it might inform legislation. That's very interesting. So again, what happened here, the 3-judge panel voted 2-3 that the district court had it right, that Mazars had to honor the subpoena and hand over the information. And they asked the full panel, will you rehear this case? 11 active judges were asked, and 8 said no, and 3 said yes, and majority rules in this case, and so there will be no further hearing. The only appeal left at this point, then, is to the Supreme Court, and that's where Jay Sekulow says they'll take it. It's an interesting argument that they're making. I mean, they have the opportunity to make it, and Katsas, I guess, is doing it, that this is important. It would be open season on the president's personal records if Congress were able to compel the disclosure of these records. Of course, remember that he's talking about the disclosure of the president's tax records, and for the past 40-plus years, that has never been an issue. I don't know, except for Donald Trump, it would never be a threat to presidential autonomy or independence to ask for their tax records for the past 8 years, because they've already been disclosed as a routine matter of having filed for the presidency and running as a candidate openly in the United States. They all do it. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. My 1-minute look away at the Yovanovitch hearings indicates that I guess she has been a terrific witness and has informed the public to some extent. And I have, let's see, there's lots of discussion that perhaps the disruptive tactics of the Republicans in the hearing will provide the pizzazz that the press was apparently looking for and garner them more attention this time. But yeah, it's been pretty interesting watching the comments fly by. So I'm looking forward to being able to review the Yovanovitch testimony myself. So back to the Washington Post story about the suit over the president's tax paperwork. I get the idea that Katsas is complaining about, that it would be disruptive if the Congress were allowed to compel the president to disclose personal records based on the possibility that it might inform legislation. Remember here that it was the position of the House and of the Ways and Means Committee in particular that they were seeking the president's tax information in order to examine whether or not they thought the policies of the IRS with respect to their policy to automatically audit sitting presidents was being executed, I guess, in their view, properly. Apparently, that's the law. Sitting presidents are automatically audited, I guess, as a control measure and a measure of accountability, if not necessarily transparency. It's usually transparency that goes hand in hand with the accountability because the tax information is released publicly. Here, of course, with Trump, it's not. So it raises a question. And I mean, I think Katsas has a problem in that he's been painted into a corner by the impertinent, really, behavior exhibited by by Trump himself as a matter of fact, in this case, by continuing to refuse to release his tax information, he defeats and frustrates the purpose of this duly enacted congressional statute that the IRS will audit sitting presidents. Now, how do we know that they are, A, complying with the law at all? Do we know that they're auditing him at all? And do we know whether they're doing it properly, or have they been improperly influenced by the fact that he's the president and is a vindictive son of a bitch and the kind of a person who would let it be known in the IRS that if you audit me and find anything wrong or anything that anybody gives me any problems about, you will be fired and perhaps hunted down and killed. I don't really know. Who knows what he threatens people with? Some things will happen to you. Things are going to start happening to you. It sounds like a threat, right? We don't know what he threatens people with. We don't know if he threatened anybody, the IRS. That's the point. The Ways and Means Committee has oversight authority over the IRS and how they enforce the statutes. If the statutes say there has to be an audit and we have no public information that tells us anything about whether or not the IRS has in fact even looked at the guy's tax returns, you have questions. So are they following the law? We need to know. What does the IRS have to say about the audits that they've been performing now? And do they match with what the paperwork says, or are they just lying? The only way to find out is to see the paperwork, ask the IRS what they have said about these things, and see, do they match? So that's the situation they find themselves in. The possibility that it might inform legislation is a weak formulation, intentionally, I'm sure, by Katsas here. What's actually going on here is the Ways and Means Committee has a legitimate interest in finding out whether or not the IRS is actually executing the law as written. It's not a question of whether or not it might possibly inform legislation. It might. I mean, in that they might find themselves in the position of having to write new legislation that says it will now be illegal for the IRS in cases where a president refuses to divulge his tax information voluntarily. It'll be illegal for them, or not to perform the audits as ordered under current law, and failure to do so is punishable by XYZ. They might need to do that, or they might need to redesign the law to, maybe they even want to redesign the law in order to accommodate presidents who want to keep their tax information private for whatever reason. What processes will be in place in order to guarantee the Ways and Means Committee that their intended mandate that sitting presidents always be audited for accountability purposes is actually being executed? The idea that Katsas can't see a valid legislative purpose in that is just ridiculous. He's imagining, though, for the sake of bolstering his argument, I'm sure, that all sorts of private information, not just tax information, might be subpoenaed. But then again, if the President of the United States puts the Congress in its oversight authority in a position to have doubts about whether or not he's in compliance with the law, or whether or not he's pressuring people to violate the law for his personal benefit, they're going to have to find out about it. And it's, here it's just an awfully stupid, it's a hint that Katsas might be willing to simply destroy the concept of co-equal branches in order to protect the president if the situation is just right. But if the president is someone he doesn't like, we would wonder whether he would come out in the same position. Anyway, we'll never have a chance to find out because the D.C. Circuit won't take the case. Now the question is whether or not the Supreme Court will. And then for the question of whether or not the court will take the case up for some sort of consideration, I believe the question is whether or not 4 justices are willing to come to the conclusion and sign on to an opinion stating that the case is worthy of consideration. After which, then of course the goal will be getting to 5. Whether they have 4 who think that there's a serious question regarding separation of powers here, like Katsas, is an open question. They certainly have plenty of hacks, but will they want to get involved in this case? The hacks will. Do they have 4 hacks who are willing to put their necks on the chopping block and perhaps run the risk of of a 5th justice joining them and forever destroying the credibility of the Supreme Court of the United States? Or is it something that we think we can trust Roberts to head off? I don't know. But I guess it'll be some time before we find out about that. But it's certainly Trump's intention that everyone come away with the belief that this could still come out his way. So we'll see. We'll see what happens. We're basically left with that. But that's the setup for all this. The court's order, as it continues here, does not mean Trump's tax records will be turned over to Congress immediately. Don't be under any impression that that's going to happen. The D.C. Circuit previously said that it would put any ruling against the president on hold for 7 days, just 7 though, to give Trump's attorneys time to ask the Supreme Court to step in, at which point the Supreme Court might say, well, we'll give you considerably more than 7 days. Don't do anything until we decide. Sekulow said in a statement, cited the well-reasoned dissent in Trump's decision to go to the Supreme Court. Trump's attorneys are also planning to ask the High Court as soon as Thursday, that would have been yesterday, to block a similar subpoena for the president's tax records from the Manhattan District Attorney, who was investigating hush money payments in the lead up to the 2016 election. The New York-based appeals court ruled against Trump this month and refused to block the subpoena to his accounting firm, Mazars USA. Now I'm really confused. Who's doing what here? I thought the Mazars case was the one we were talking about just a moment ago in the D.C. Circuit. All right, well, here's the answer. The D.C. Circuit case centers on a House Oversight Committee subpoena from March for the president's accounting firm records issued months before the beginning of its impeachment inquiry related to Trump's alleged efforts to pressure Ukraine to investigate political rival Joe Biden. So, okay, that's extraneous information. Doesn't really actually help straighten things out. Reading on the fly sometimes does this. The request for information followed testimony from Trump's former personal attorney, Michael Cohen, that Trump had exaggerated his wealth when he sought loans. Lawmakers are investigating potential conflicts of interest, including the accuracy of the president's financial disclosures. A divided 3-judge panel of the court held in October, here at the D.C. court, right, that the House had issued its subpoena for legitimate legislative pursuits, not an impermissible law enforcement purpose, as the president's lawyer had argued. I think they shouldn't even have given credence to that argument, quite honestly. Why shouldn't they have law enforcement as an interest? They absolutely should be permitted to do so, considering that they will later, or could later, sit as a grand jury and trial court if they find evidence of wrongdoing. I mean, is that a law enforcement purpose or a judicial purpose? That they'll be sitting for a judicial purpose, having discovered as part of their prerogatives that they have a law enforcement problem as well. I mean, Congress has these extra legislative functions. I don't know why they don't acknowledge it. So I don't know if I like the formulation of that. Legitimate legislative pursuits, yes. Not an impermissible, well, it's good that they say it's not an impermissible law enforcement purpose. I guess that could be interpreted, the Trump lawyers will interpret that to mean that law enforcement purposes are impermissible, and others will interpret it as meaning, no, there are legitimate law enforcement purposes. There are also impermissible ones, but this isn't one of them. So, moving on, we're in the right place. Okay, well, interesting. Contrary to the president's arguments, the committee possesses authority under both the House rules and the Constitution to issue the subpoena, and Mazars must comply, wrote Judge David S. Tatel, who was joined by Judge Patricia A. Millett. Both were nominated by Democratic presidents. Rao, the dissenting judge on the panel, restated her view that the committee had exceeded its authority with a legislative subpoena investigating whether the president broke the law. I don't even agree with that. I mean, what's wrong with a legislative subpoena asking whether or not the legislation they crafted has been enforced properly? I find nothing wrong with that, but she does. By upholding this subpoena, the panel opinion has shifted the balance of power between Congress and the president, and maybe even that's not a bad thing. Supposing they have, the balance of power shifts very frequently, and many could argue that it was the intent of the founders that the power ought to have been in the hands of Congress all along and not in the hands of the president. She says, by upholding this subpoena, the panel opinion has shifted the balance of power between Congress and the president and allowed a congressional committee to circumvent the careful process of impeachment. She wrote, well, they haven't circumvented it now. They're involved in the careful process of impeachment. And my guess is that Judge Rao doesn't care very much for that careful process either, but we don't know that for sure. The House subsequently passed, after the initial panel opinion, a resolution affirming its impeachment inquiry. But Rao wrote Wednesday that the committee, quote, is wrong to suggest, unquote, that questions about the validity of the subpoena are no longer of practical consequence. It is an open question, she said, whether a defective subpoena can be revived by after-the-fact approval. Well, since majority opinion on the case is that it is in fact not a defective subpoena, that part of her objection, I think, is pretty much no longer of practical consequence unless you can find a way to get 5 justices, and it is possible, to declare the subpoena defective from the beginning. But I guess, as we've outlined a number of times in the show, 5 justices so determined can do anything they like, and there's no appeal from it, and that's why it's important to vote every time for president so that lunatics don't get to name people with whom they have an understanding that they should clear the president's name at all costs and nominate them to the Supreme Court. Would that ever happen? Sure, why not? Just as a reminder, boy, throat really going crazy all of a sudden. The judges that are being appointed to lifetime seats on the federal bench at all times these days include lunatics with no particular qualification. In fact, adjudged unqualified for the courts, and who have records of having expounded rather insane or just plain offensive beliefs for many, many years. What's the name of the judge that we were just talking about a few days ago when Joan visited us, who was moving through the committee, whose name now escapes me, but the latest, most egregious example of rated not qualified judges. He wasn't a judge. He wasn't even a trial attorney. He'd never tried a case before, but found himself approved by the full Senate just the other day, and that's that. Lifetime appointment now until, of course, we get around to impeaching him, which will never happen because we'll have, even if this is successful, impeachment fatigue for years now. Just by way of prediction. Okay, let's see. There's much more, of course, happening around, and a lot of you keeping one or both eyes on Yovanovitch's continued testimony, which appears to be quite compelling. Let's see. There's, here's an important Friday story that you'll need to be aware of. How about this, by way of headlines? This from the Washington, D.C. news radio program, most popular news radio channel on the dial, WTOP News. Neil Augenstein. Many of you in the Washington, D.C. area will recognize Augenstein's name from his frequent reports, frequent daily reports on WTOP. Going back a ways to, when was this? May of this year. You may recall this story of a woman arrested for trespassing, but showing up at CIA headquarters. A woman who allegedly trespassed 3 days in a row at the CIA headquarters recently has also showed up at the home of former President Barack Obama, according to a federal judge in Alexandria, Virginia. So clearly a very confused woman. However, she makes headlines this time by adding this, I don't know, is this comical or tragic at this point? But it gets comical marks in the headlines, though. That's why we bring it to you. Judge says woman arrested in CIA trespass looking for Agent Penis. Later went to Obama home. Now, I'm not clear, having not read the story yet, and just the headline tells me, it says that in scare quotes, Agent Penis. So, like, did you go up there to the CIA and try to get in, and they're like, well, what's your business here? State your business. Well, I need to speak to Agent Penis. Or is it that I'm looking for Agent Penis? And, not just any penis will do here. It's got to be an agent, but it's capitalized. So it's like, that's the guy's name. So that's not a super creative way of getting into CIA headquarters, by the way. It was funnier in Fletch, looking for or identifying yourself as Dr. Rosenpenis is kind of a funny thing to do. But just plain old Agent Penis is either, she was stuck, she's thinking on the fly, or, well, she's just mentally ill, and that's that. So, okay. So after, I guess, showing up at CIA headquarters, I don't know if she asked all 3 days to speak to Agent Penis or whether it was just one of the 3 days that she asked. If it was just one, presumably the last, because that would kind of be the last straw, I think, before they call the cops. All right, that does it. All right, well, now she has shown up at Barack Obama's house. I don't know whether she thinks Agent Penis has been assigned there, or she's looking for President Penis, or whether the whole penis thing has been left by the wayside and she's just looking to make a visit at this point. During a status hearing, U.S. District Court John Anderson, penis, would be very funny if that were the case, but it's not. John Anderson said he had been informed that Jennifer G. Hernandez, 58, of North Carolina, who is charged with trespassing at an agency installation without authorization for repeatedly visiting the CIA in May, later showed up at Obama's D.C. area home, despite the court's order to stay away from all government-related facilities. She had been released before the trial, and I guess they'll pretty much be done with that idea from now on. Hernandez's federal public defender, Whitney Minter, said she, prosecutors, and probation officials are trying to find a way to resolve the case without trial, but said she was considering a plea of not guilty by reason of insanity. Anderson told Hernandez, "You have to meet people halfway in obeying court orders that could prevent a criminal prosecution in favor of getting mental health treatment." And I think we'd all rather have it come out that way. "We're trying to help you, not punish you," Anderson told Hernandez. "The restraint the government is showing is unusual and appreciated in not seeking to revoke her release before trial." Outside the courtroom, Minter and prosecutor William Reed declined to elaborate on Hernandez's behavior as she awaits trial. Anderson said prosecutors and the defense want to, quote, get you, Hernandez, to a safer place and get you the help you need. That is very kind of them to try to do, although it may be that it's time to, keep a closer eye on her. But, that's one of our problems. We don't really have facilities in between, but before we can enter a court order mandating mental health treatment, holding you in jail, usually not that good for people's mental health states, quite honestly, whether they need additional help or not. So, anyway, when asked if she wanted to say anything, Hernandez said she has been through a lot of turmoil, that a family member had been trying to kill her since she was 36, and referred to unlikely threats. She acknowledged being at the Obama home. "I won't go back there," Hernandez told the judge. "Tell me what to do, and I will abide by the law." Well, I thought they told her last time. Anderson told Hernandez in a stern but kind tone, you shouldn't be going to places like the CIA and the Obama's house. You have to fight the callings, and you just can't go back there. We all want to get this resolved in a non-judicial way, Anderson said, in granting a continuance for a February 11th court hearing. Please, the judge implored. So that's, I mean, he's being kind and gentle. I don't know how well she's going to do in resisting the callings. I guess she hears voices that tell her she needs to go to the CIA and or Obama's house. And sometimes or all the time ask about the whereabouts of Agent Penis. And I guess, you got to be general with her, right? Don't ask for any agents. Don't make up any agent names. Don't name them after body parts. Don't look for them at all. Stay away from the government. Leave people alone until February 11th, and we can figure out what we can do to help you. Anyway, just keeping you up on CIA news and or penis news. We'll cover either one, I guess, when it's necessary. Okay, let's see. What other stories? I bet you weren't expecting that one, but we always like to throw you a surprise, and Friday is a good way of doing it. We didn't discuss this story, and so let's at least put it on the record. Going back to the Lev Parnas beat, Washington Post with this story. At donor dinner, that's a tongue twister, at donor dinner, Giuliani associate Parnas said he discussed Ukraine with Trump, directly with Trump, according to people familiar with his account. I don't know how much stock you want to put in the stories of Lev Parnas, but it's an interesting addition. Rosalind Helderman, Matt Zapotowski, Tom Hamburger, Josh Dawsey, teaming up on this one from back on the 12th of this month. The April 2018 dinner was designed, they begin, to be an intimate affair, an opportunity for a handful of big donors to a super PAC allied with President Trump to personally interact with the president and his eldest son. Which, by the way, is Don Jr. one of, is he, along with Eric, supposed to be running the business of the Trump organization during the supposed, recusal from business activities for the most part of Donald Trump? Because Don Jr. certainly seems to be enjoying the political activity a lot more. And although he's not working in government, and that's, I think, permissible for him to be doing both private business and campaign work, he's spending an awful lot of time on one and not the other. And I guess since there's no shareholders to speak of outside of the family of the Trump organization, nobody's going to sue about that. But he should be a very busy guy if the Trump organization were anything like anything like the size and scope claimed. He really wouldn't be able to be paying attention to anything else. Anyway, in an exclusive suite known as the Trump Townhouse at Trump's Washington Hotel, the group, including Jack Nicklaus III, the grandson of the famous golfer, and a New York developer, snapped photos, dined, and chatted about their pet issues with the president for about 90 minutes. Among those in attendance were two Florida business executives who had little history with Republican politics but had snagged a spot at the dinner with the promise of a major contribution to the America First Super PAC. They turned the conversation to Ukraine, according to people familiar with the event, who spoke on a condition of anonymity, can you believe it, to describe the private dinner, because they were afraid they were going to get in trouble. One of the men, Lev Parnas, what do you know, has described to associates that he and his business partner, Igor Fruman, told Trump at the dinner that they thought that the U.S. ambassador to Ukraine, who's testifying right now, was unfriendly to the president and his interests. According to Parnas, the president reacted strongly to the news. Of course, how else we're going to react very, very strongly to this news. And so he did. Trump immediately suggested that the then ambassador, Marie Yovanovitch, who had been in the Foreign Service for 32 years and served under Democratic and Republican presidents, should be fired, people familiar with his account said. Parnas declined to comment, at least at this point. Todd Blanche, a lawyer for Fruman, declined to comment. The White House did not respond to a request for comment. Parnas' account of personally discussing Ukraine with Trump more than 18 months ago suggests that he and Fruman had more personal interaction with the president and potentially more influence over his views on that country than the White House has acknowledged. What a surprise. We're all shocked at that, I'm sure. Trump has said he does not know the two men who later partnered with Trump's personal attorney, Rudy Giuliani, to hunt for damaging material about Democrats in Ukraine before being charged last month with funneling foreign money into campaign contributions. They've pleaded not guilty. And then, of course, his story, if it's possible, I have a picture with them because of a picture with everybody. The note that they were arrested at Dulles last month. And more denials, and says, I don't know who they are. Maybe they're clients of Rudy. Good dodge. Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. So during the break, just checking in on things. Most of you are likely aware of this because you are over there watching, and I can't blame you. As Marie Yovanovitch testifies, allegedly, the President of the United States, and I mean it's alleged that he's the President, is tweeting witness intimidation in real time, which is not going unnoticed either by the witness or the chairman or the rest of you watching this. The Trump is out there bad-mouthing and intimidating Yovanovitch on Twitter right now while she's testifying. And of course, ordinarily you would probably come to the conclusion by yourself that that is witness intimidation, pretty much the definition of it. But just to be sure, they have asked Ambassador Yovanovitch, what's it like? Or what are you feeling with the president tweeting these things while you're testifying? And she says it's intimidating, and she's a witness. So that's witness intimidation, and we're done. Lock him up. But, whatever. They'll make their excuses about these things. He'll continue to do it, even though I think with just about anybody else, there would be cops dispatched to the home at this point. Basically, someone ought to be swatting the White House at this point, except they'd be right in doing so. There's a federal crime in progress at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, calling all cars. I believe we've got some units on the scene right now. Let's see if we can't do something about this. But, of course, Republicans will be saying that's not intimidation. He's just pointing out pertinent facts about the witness. Well, of course, that even may be true. I mean, as it happens, the facts probably aren't true. But when it's the President of the United States who exercises such enormous power over the lives of all individuals here in the United States, and really probably shouldn't, but we are allowing him to do it anyway, but particularly someone who is a government employee, well, it's something that ought to be investigated. But we're trying to keep things simple and move quickly here. It's just very interesting. Anyway, I thought I would note it for the record, just in case you're one of the people who are following along here instead of watching the hearings. This is basically my giving you permission to go and check this out. Come back to us when it comes to the podcast. All right. So where do we leave off? Was the Washington Post's reports about Lev Parnas telling people that he spoke to Trump directly about Ukraine and kicked this whole thing off in as early as April of 2018. And Trump, of course, saying, I don't know him. Maybe they were clients of Rudy, et cetera, et cetera. But the two men had some personal interactions with Trump, both before and after they met Giuliani in the summer of 2018. Those included encounters at a Florida fundraiser in 2016 and during a visit to Mar-a-Lago, the president's private estate, as they call it here. It's the club, of course, according to social media accounts and people who encountered them. So, that's problematic, but it's dismissed by the president as, I have pictures with everybody. Parnas's account of the 2018 dinner is the first indication that he or Fruman interacted directly with Trump about Ukraine. His description of their conversation suggests that the Boca Raton businessman, who emigrated as a child from Ukraine, could hold key information about Trump's pressure campaign on his home country, an effort that set in motion the ongoing impeachment inquiry, which is happening now. The president was updated regularly by Giuliani on what he was learning about Parnas's and Fruman's efforts in Ukraine, according to a former senior administration official who, you'll never believe it, spoke on condition of anonymity. It's just not true that he had no idea who these guys were. He knew Lev particularly, the person said. In February, Parnas and Fruman met with Ukraine's then-president, Petro Poroshenko, according to Edward B. McMahon, Jr., a lawyer for Parnas. Now, that's funny enough. Ed McMahon is your lawyer, but Ed McMahon, Jr., he's the grandson of the famous Ed McMahon. I don't know who he is, but anyway, probably no relation. But there is something else funny about this. As I read through this article the other day, I recall, I said, I've heard the names of lawyers for Parnas brought up before. Edward B. McMahon Jr., I don't think, has been one of them. And I think that, like, in this article alone, there's at least two people that are just described as, you can have multiple lawyers, but it's interesting. The guy who's constantly scrounging around for money, and then when he finds it, blows it in gigantic wads at fundraisers for the president. How is he paying all these lawyers? He's got a lot of lawyers. He's got 5 cell phones. So, I suppose there's something to one cell phone for each lawyer, maybe. Anyway, this is what Ed McMahon says. Parnas and Fruman met with Petro Poroshenko, according to McMahon. They were doing so, he said, on a request from Giuliani, who was acting on orders from Trump. McMahon said the two proposed that in exchange for a state visit, the Ukrainian president would announce investigations into former Vice President Joe Biden's son and an unfounded theory that Ukraine interfered in the 2016 presidential race. Why was Poroshenko listening to them? I don't know, but this is what was happening. In an interview last week, Giuliani declined to comment on his interactions with the two men, citing the criminal investigation. But of course, he's the lawyer for them. So, again, Parnas says, at least for purposes of representing fraud guarantee, which, we shouldn't even afford him the luxury of being able to draw lines between himself and his various ventures because he didn't take care to separate them properly and legally. So, I guess as a legal matter, there would be no separation between them if he didn't follow the rules with all these things. But Giuliani is his lawyer. Ed McMahon is his lawyer. Joe DeGeneva and Victoria Tensing are his lawyers, but also his employers as well. And there's still more to come. So at some point, for whatever reason, their lawyer, McMahon, says that these two guys are there. When? Let's read back. In February. So February 2019, they're telling Petro Poroshenko, we can get you a state visit with the president if you announce these investigations. That's pretty interesting. I don't know whether they knew about aid being held up or not, or whether that would be part of the picture. But why Poroshenko thinks that these two guys represent anything about the United States, we don't know. In an interview last week, Giuliani declined to comment on his interactions with the two men, even though he's the lawyer for them. But he said Parnas and Fruman already had met the president when he first, that would be Trump, I think, when he first encountered them in the summer of 2018. I did not introduce them to the president, he said. And that appears to be true if the story of them meeting him in April of 2018 is true. Trump, that is. And if Giuliani first met them, if that's true that he first met them in the summer of 2018, then yes, they knew the president before he knew them. Giuliani knew them. In an interview with the Washington Post before his arrest, Parnas said he got involved in the Trump campaign because he admired the real estate developer, whom he said he had met several times before the election. I think he's going to go down as one of the greatest presidents ever, even with all this negativity, he said. Well, that's just wrong, but okay. Now, this is fine. Parnas's attorney, are we still talking about McMahon? I don't know, because another one gets named here, I think. Parnas's attorneys plural, I should say, have now indicated that he is disappointed with Trump's efforts to distance himself, suggesting that he may be willing to cooperate with the congressional inquiry. I don't know if I believe that or not. There isn't anything that Parnas did in the Ukraine, they say, relative to the Bidens or the 2016 election that he wasn't asked to do by Giuliani, who was acting, not really in this sense, but acting on the direction of the president, McMahon said. I think for that one we'll use the acting. Brilliant. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. Not clear if the Democrats, though, are interested in negotiating for his testimony, given the criminal case filed against him in New York. I don't think I'm sure he would ask for immunity in that, and I don't think they want to get involved in that one just yet. Prosecutors have alleged that Parnas and Fruman gave campaign contributions to the pro-Trump super PAC and other political committees in an effort to, quote, advance their personal financial interests and the political interests of at least one Ukrainian government official with whom they were working, unquote. That's interesting. I don't think I have any more information about that. Yovanovitch testified last time behind closed doors, and probably again today, that she was told by a Ukrainian official in February that Parnas and Fruman were working with Giuliani and that they were interested in having a different ambassador at post, I guess, because they wanted to have business dealings in Ukraine or additional business dealings. And I guess they felt that Yovanovitch was going to stand in their way. An attorney for Parnas, another one, Joseph A. Bondi. Have we called his name before? I can't recall. That sounds maybe more familiar. Anyway, he said that, I guess, Parnas denies having participated in the president and Mr. Giuliani's efforts to remove Ambassador Yovanovitch at the request of Ukrainian government officials or to benefit his and Mr. Fruman's prospective liquefied natural gas business interests in Ukraine. Take that however you want. That may mean he denies having participated in the effort to remove Yovanovitch, period, or it may just mean that he denies having participated in it as part of the Trump-Giuliani effort to remove Yovanovitch and or at the request of a Ukrainian government official, or that he merely denies that it was to benefit his and Fruman's prospective LNG business. I don't know. Very unclear. But that's what Bondi gets paid for, I assume. However, people who spoke to Parnas and Fruman said that they spoke often of their displeasure with Yovanovitch and claimed that they had personally discussed the ambassador with Trump on more than one occasion. They were constantly complaining about her, said one person in touch with the duo starting in the summer of 2018. The person said they were constantly shell-shocked that Trump had stated clearly to them that he wanted to get rid of Yovanovitch, but that many months passed and she remained in place. I'm not sure what that means. That the person said they were constantly shell-shocked. So I guess Parnas and Fruman are constantly shell-shocked, not that Trump said he wanted to get rid of her. I think they were expecting that, but that she hadn't been gotten rid of yet, despite the fact that the president said he wanted her gone. In an interview with the Post last month, Giuliani said that Trump blamed the State Department for slow-walking his desire to remove Yovanovitch. The president fired her 3 times and thought she was gone, he said, because he never checks on anything. The president thought she was gone long before she was actually fired. More than a year after the dinner at the Trump Hotel. That would have been in April of 2018. Yovanovitch was summarily removed from her post following a campaign in conservative media to paint her as an Obama administration holdover opposed to Trump. Remember, that was largely coordinated by John Solomon, who we discussed yesterday. She testified that she was told by State Department officials that she had done nothing wrong, but that the president had been advocating for her removal since the summer of 2018. She denied she had been in any way disloyal to Trump. 2 months after Yovanovitch's removal, Zelensky and Trump discussed her in the phone conversation that sparked calls for Trump's impeachment. Well, additional calls for Trump's impeachment, really, I should say. According to a rough transcript released by the White House, which isn't a transcript, Zelensky told Trump Quote, "It was great that you were the first one who told me that she was a bad ambassador because I agree with you 100%. Unquote. It is not clear when Trump first told Zelensky about the ambassador. That's an interesting question. And now the administration today, I think, is trying to push around, and I think I read that Republicans at the hearings this morning were reading from what they purported was a transcript of the first call that for some reason Trump thought nobody knew about, but everybody did know about, the April 2019 call to Zelensky following his election as president, as opposed to the July call, which we've all read about, which was a follow-up and was supposed to be something of a congratulatory call about the parliamentary elections which followed. Okay. Anyway, so maybe we find out from the purported transcript of the April call that Yovanovitch has been mentioned by Trump, but maybe not. And maybe those of you watching the Yovanovitch testimony know the answer to that one already. At any rate, during the July call, Trump responds, well, she's going to go through some things, which is a very thuggish thing for him to say. Of course, the president's hostility to Yovanovitch appears to have begun even earlier than previously known. He reacted strongly when her, of course, strongly, he loves that word. He reacted strongly, we should deny him that word, when her role in Ukraine came up with Parnas and Fruman at the April 30th, 2018 dinner at his Washington hotel, according to Parnas's account. Trump's eldest son, Donald Trump Jr., was also in attendance. Alan Futerfas, remember him? An attorney for Trump Jr., said in a statement that, quote, over the past few years, he has attended literally hundreds of donor events. Nothing about this one stands out. The president's son stoked conservative anger toward Yovanovitch this spring by retweeting an article calling for her removal and saying, we need, quote, less of these jokers as ambassadors, unquote. I'm not certain it's the case, but I think I recall hearing that the article that he retweeted calling for her removal was perhaps a John Solomon creation as well, but I'm not positive about that. The Trump Hotel dinner was one of several events for top donors designed to show that the super PAC was the right venue for supporters to send large checks, according to a person familiar with the event who spoke on, believe it or not, condition of anonymity. Interesting. And this time the excuse is condition of anonymity to discuss the private dinner. You see, the dinner was private, so I have to be anonymous because otherwise I'm violating the privacy of the dinner. I don't even know if that's a real thing or not. Anyway, Kelly Sadler, a spokeswoman for the Super PAC, said the roundtable dinner was, quote, typical of the dinners arranged for potential donors, unquote. About 15 people were in attendance, including Nicklaus, according to people familiar with the event. Also in attendance, they said, was Stanley Gale, the real estate developer from New York, whose company developed a massive complex in South Korea. This is where this gets interesting too, including a golf course designed by Nicklaus. And I don't think the Nicklaus that was there, but the grandfather of the Nicklaus that was there is who they mean. Gale, although Jack Nicklaus Jr., father of Nicklaus III, I think is also in golf course design, if I'm not mistaken. So I'm not really sure who designed this thing. Gale pitched the president on using his property, this golf complex in South Korea, to host a summit with the leader of North Korea, according to people familiar with the dinner. How do you like that? So if you can't have the summit at one of your properties, maybe you would have it at one of my properties, Mr. President, give me the money. The president probably not that thrilled about that, but he may have said, well, if you make $1 million hosting our event, why don't you give $500,000 back to our super PAC or to me personally or something like that, and I'll feel a lot better about it. I'm sure that probably entered his mind as well. So what do we got? 15 people in attendance. Lev Parnas and Igor Fruman are 2 of the 15. That's a pretty significant chunk given over to them. Also there, Nicklaus III, Stanley Gale, we're up to 4 here. Nicklaus did not respond to a request for comment. Gale declined to comment, in case you wanted to know more from them. In addition to Nicklaus, other attendees included Tommy Hicks Jr., 5, a Republican fundraiser who is close friends with Trump's son, and I believe had an official role at the Republican National Committee at some point, and has been spotted with Don Trump Jr. in the infamous Power Breakfast in Beverly Hills, I think it was, photo with Lev Parnas and Igor Fruman. I'm not sure of the date of that one, though. Roy Bailey, also there, who would be number 6, a Texas businessman who has served as a top Trump fundraiser and is close to Giuliani, people said. Neither responded to requests for comment. After the dinner, Parnas posted photos of it on social media, erroneously tagging it as having been held at the White House. In one image, he stood with Trump between 2 American flags, giving a thumbs up. "Thank you, President Trump," 3 exclamation points. He wrote, adding, "incredible dinner and even better conversation," which means, of course, that it was about Ukraine. All right. So interesting background. Something to keep in mind as you're watching the Jovanovic testimony right now. Okay. Let's see. What other nonsense is happening here that we might want to bring to your attention as we close out the show? Scrolling a little further back in Pocket. Okay, well, there's this story suggested to us by Kate Sherrill. Perhaps we'll at least put this one on the record. I don't know if this needs to be combed all the way through here, but just another aspect of all this stuff. From Politico, judge slams feds over murky stance on McCabe. Remember him? Josh Gerstein writing this piece yesterday. A federal judge excoriated Justice Department officials Thursday for their handling of potential criminal charges against former Deputy FBI Director Andrew McCabe, saying the continued uncertainty over the prosecution, which they've so far declined to bring, as it turns out, was unfair to McCabe and the public. This is not a hard case, U.S. District Court Judge Reggie Walton said. I was a good prosecutor for a long time. Deciding whether or not you're going to charge someone with false statements or perjury is not that hard, factually or legally. Maybe politically, but not factually or legally. Walton, a George W. Bush appointee overseeing a Freedom of Information Act lawsuit filed by a watchdog group to obtain records about McCabe's firing, complained at a hearing Thursday afternoon that the Justice Department claims about an ongoing potential prosecution of McCabe may have been a smokescreen to persuade the judge to forestall the case demanding documents. You see that? Okay. So just to be clear about what is actually happening here is that there's a FOIA suit looking for the records about McCabe's firing. I don't know who's filing the suit or why. Could be any number of people, but maybe we'll figure this out. But apparently the Justice Department is reluctant to release the records being requested, citing the possibility of a potential prosecution of McCabe. They wouldn't want to release those materials in advance of the prosecution if it's coming, and thereby perhaps undermine their case. But Judge Walton here is saying, I think that you're dragging this out and you have some other reason not to want to release the information being requested here. And the possibility of prosecuting McCabe isn't a real one. All right. Shouldn't I know whether the wool was being pulled over my eyes? Walton said. I do have concerns about whether I was being manipulated into stopping this case from moving forward. Your Honor, the wool was not being pulled over your eyes, Justice Department Attorney Justin Sandberg said. He insisted claims lawyers made in a secret court filing and closed-door audience with the judge in September were accurate. For about a year, the Justice Department has maintained that most of the records sought in the FOIA case were off-limits because of an ongoing enforcement action, widely believed to be the government's investigation aimed at deciding whether to bring charges against McCabe for allegedly lying to FBI colleagues about contacts with the media prior to the 2016 presidential election. After more than 20 years at the FBI, McCabe was fired last year following findings by the Justice Department Inspector General and the FBI's Office of Professional Responsibility that he displayed a lack of candor in his dealings with internal investigators and a top Justice Department official. A criminal investigation followed, along with reports that McCabe was on the verge of indictment 2 months ago, but no indictment ever emerged. It's like almost like the Q conspiracy for these guys. Requests from McCabe's attorney for clarity have been ignored by prosecutors. McCabe's lawyers say the criminal inquiry and his firings were both tainted by a campaign of public invective from President Donald Trump, in which he's involved in another one right now about Maria Ivanovich as she testifies. So easy to believe. Trump has repeatedly denounced McCabe on Twitter, calling him a major sleazebag, and celebrating his firing as a great day for the FBI. On Wednesday, government lawyers reversed course in the FOIA suit and said they would no longer argue that records about the investigation into McCabe needed to be withheld because of a pending enforcement proceeding. However, they remained circumspect about McCabe, further adding to the mystery about his status. That vagueness clearly fueled the judge's concern that he might have been tricked into delaying the FOIA case with a spurious claim that charges against the former FBI official were still being mulled. When Walton pressed about what had changed since, Sandberg was exceedingly vague. Obviously, you know that time has passed. What's changed since then? Asked Walton. Well, the date. That's really not much of an answer there, Sandberg. Well, obviously, time has passed. There's various proceedings the government has to consider and various interests the government has to What? Did you just say the same thing over again? There's various proceedings the government has to consider and various interests the government has to consider. Okay. The Justice Department attorney said. Walton said something must have precipitated the shift. I don't know what's going on behind closed doors as far as the potential prosecution of Mr. McCabe is concerned. Something must have happened, the judge said. Soon after the exchange Thursday, Walton ordered Sandberg and J.P. Cooney, a prosecutor from the U.S. Attorney's Office, to join a closed-door court session to explore the grounds for the change. Walton ordered the ex parte exchange, even though the answers the judge would get from it would likely be unsatisfying, apparently because the Justice Department does not believe it is obligated to explain its decision-making to the judge. Eee, that's not fun. During the earlier public portion of the hearing, a lawyer for the group pursuing the FOIA suit said the reversal merits some explication from the Justice Department. I guess that's right. Here we are. Now we get to know who is suing who here. We believe we are, at a minimum, entitled to an explanation as for why now, abruptly, the government has withdrawn its claim, said Ann Weissman of Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington. Crew. Okay. I could easily have seen Judicial Watch asking for these things. Weissman noted McCabe has filed a civil suit over his firing and is arguing that the Justice Department violated procedure in a dismissal that seems to have been aimed at terminating him just before he would have been eligible for retirement benefits. One FBI policy calls for a 30-day notice before being fired, but states that can be reduced to 7 days in cases involving evidence of a crime. Weissman said the Justice Department may be posturing about prosecuting McCabe to improve its legal standing in the lawsuit he filed. If there's no crime, the government faces a vulnerability in its decision to give Mr. McCabe only 7 days and not 30 days, she said. However, Sandberg complained Crew was trying to use the FOIA case to manage the Justice Department's process for seeking criminal charges. FOIA does not permit the plaintiff to superintend criminal proceedings, the DOJ lawyer said. Sandberg also said it would be perverse for the government to suffer any consequences for its reversal, which he said would allow more information to flow to the public. After the closed-door session on Thursday, Walton did not indicate publicly what had transpired, but ordered DOJ to start releasing documents demanded in the case. He also indicated that he planned to unseal a declaration the Justice Department filed in March explaining the ongoing enforcement proceedings that justified withholding the records Crew requested. Okay, so a break in the dam then on this case, and it winds up, this article does, this way. In an interview earlier Thursday, McCabe said he'd still gotten no definitive word about the state of the criminal probe he faced, and added that he wasn't sure what to make of the government's course change in the FOIA case. There's certainly different ways you can interpret it, he told CNN's John Berman. I am still waiting to be told directly by the Justice Department that they have abandoned this completely baseless effort to try to charge me. I, of course, have not done anything wrong, and I'll be happy to get that call if and when it comes. Interesting, complex case, worth keeping an eye on, and it may turn out in the end that, there's really nothing to charge McCabe with, And it'll be very interesting if Crew gets a hold of documents that tend to show, once again, it'll be really interesting and par for the course to find out that the Justice Department was in fact acting to protect the president from the public release of documents clearly establishing that he was firing McCabe and doing so with as little notice as possible under the cover that he was going to be charged with a crime when he never really was going to be. That's not the most serious charge facing the president, to be sure. Most of you probably know all about the serious charges facing the president because you've been watching the Yovanovitch testimony instead. I will now join you in that, and it will be up to Justice Putnam to figure out how to deal with the things for the day. Sounds like he is going to be preempting the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy to go straight to the hearings live. Podcast to come later. What could be better?
From Daily Kos Radio on networksradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
All right, very good. Thanks very much for the update on that one. What a great decision that was. I should have get away with just carrying the hearings live. Well, I needed to bring you these stories so you would be up to date on what happens over the weekend, though most of the discussion will be about that. But you're getting the best of both worlds. Both the podcast coming later and the hearings coming up live next.